Welcome to Pause for the Truth, where you can sit back, relax, and hear an honest dialogue about health, wealth, legal, and social issues. The hosts are Dr. Rogers Kane, family practice physician, and Jocelyn Turner, health education consultant, with co hosts from the Northeast Florida Medical Society and its foundation. Stay tuned for the truth about matters affecting you and your family. We're here to tell you what's really going on and why. Good evening and welcome to Pause for the Truth. I am your co host, Jocelyn Turner. It's a beautiful day in Northeast Florida. As we all know, if you're in any part of the United States, it's a scorcher. It is extremely hot, which is why an upcoming show we are going to focus on climate change again because regardless of what elected officials say, not all of them, some of them, global warming is real. But there are things we can do, and that's our goal here at Pause for the Truth to enlighten people. Tonight's discussion is going to be an interesting one. I'm sure it is something that we've talked about amongst our friends, and it's something, as they say, that's been discussed at the water cooler, but probably not in Florida because we can't use words like health equity and disparities and some of those other things. So I've heard from some folks in certain entities, but I won't start any good trouble today. That's what we've been talking about. Joining me, as usual, of course, is co-host Dr. Rogers Kane. How are you doing this evening, Dr. Kane?
At this point, you can call me Mr. Good Trouble. I will start it. I do have an issue with what's being done in Florida, especially as it relates to climate change. A position, particularly being a physician, and knowing that I don't care how much money you earn, how much money you make, you still got to breathe. And if you don't take care of this climate, you can have all the money in the world and it won't do any good. But I am doing absolutely fine. I'm excited to have this discussion amongst our guests and amongst I see the man from behind the scenes is no longer behind the scenes tonight. So it must be an important a topic important to him as well. And I do think that it's a difficult subject matter to deal with, and because there's a lot of opinions out there, and there's a lot of reasons that there's a difficulty in it because it's so complex, and there are different variables that will affect this topic and the people's opinion on the topic. But without further ado, I'm going to let you introduce our guests.
Thank you, Dr. Kane, and also welcome Tyrone for coming from behind the scene, and of course, always assuring that our technology needs are well taken care of. As Dr. Kane says, we have two esteemed guests with us tonight. One I've known for several years, and the other I just have had the pleasure of meeting this evening for the podcast. And as you can see, they are Miss Vivian Williams and LaShonda, better known as LJ Holloway. Good evening, ladies. How are you all doing?
Well, thank
Good,
you, and thank you for the invitation.
good evening. How are you? Thank you
Oh,
for
just
having me.
absolutely. And thank you for accepting the invitation. And I say that with a lot of grace because I know when we bring up certain subjects here in Florida, we have to think about our livelihood and hope that we don't make folks mad when we finish having discussions. But our goal is to enlighten and educate people, if nothing else. So look at it from that perspective. Although Dr. Kane has his own opinion, we'll let his opinion be his own. But our goal is really to educate people, and hopefully they'll understand why we decided to talk about the impact of the recent Supreme Court decision on affirmative action. I'd like to first start out by asking the question, what led to the Supreme Court even having the conversation to strike down the what was all on the book about affirmative action?
You wanted me to take down?
Go ahead.
um, it's an ongoing conversation. I would say it's not that easy to say which one started the real movement. It's been an ongoing conversation, of course, since it came into effect. I don't believe I'm gonna start off already, aren't I? I don't believe the intent of it was to be permanent, in all honesty. So I believe that there was going to be some conversation down the road anyway. But I do believe that I would say the turning point or cusp that most people know about is a large student body, specifically of the Asian community, recently sued Harvard for discrimination and saying that it was basically unconstitutional and that it was harming certain groups such as themselves. And they wanted it to be reevaluated for its constitutionality. And the Supreme Court said, sure, why not? We've been wanting to take a swing at this bad boy for a long time.
Thank you. LJ, go ahead. I see you. You just go ahead. Go ahead.
Isn't that evidence? Let's just
Yes.
be clear. You know, like I know, that Lady Justice is not blind. And considering we are just 2 days, and look, we know that Brown versus Board of Education was decided on just July 10th, 1954. So separate but equal in education, we all know is inherently unequal. And this issue did not just start today. It did not start with the very conservative Roberts Court 6-3 opinion. But the harsh reality is, much to my chagrin, this blow to higher education, and we could argue that it may or may not be a blow, but this blow to education is going to affect all persons. Because you know, like I know, and particularly in sports, Jocelyn, you and I both went to the University of Florida, and you know that the majority of the income that comes to the university outside of the budget from outside of the budget from the state government comes from sports, in particular Gator football. So now that you have these admissions practices, guess what's going to suffer? Their sports programs are going to suffer. As an African American who sat on the admissions council for the University of Florida College of Law, I can tell you that, one, there is more affirmative action with legacy admissions and with white women than there ever will be for minorities. The benefit of having African Americans in particular in a classroom is for the diversity in discussion. So this argument by the Asians, of course, one, they only make up 5% of the population. We make up 13% of the population. So certainly we don't take anybody's seat. We just happen to be a larger portion of the population.
Yeah, and the one thing that people, and again, all of us have had different conversations with people about this. And I think about the governor of Florida's decision to ban the books on African American history, but yet there was some recent discussion. So I've been told, because I just hadn't followed it like a lot of people do, that he made some ruling about educating our students on Asian American history to address the recent hate crime against Asians. So when that was told to me, it hurt, right? Because on the one hand, it was struck down, African American history was removed, but then Asian American history was included. So what is that? Am I wrong, LJ? Did that really happen, or did it not happen?
It absolutely happened. So let me just say that, since 1619, the goal has been to keep us divided, right? And in order for the oppressor to feel superior, he has to make everyone, feel like they are inferior to him. And the way you keep people divided is to give people someone to one frown upon. So now you have a lesser minority group, meaning Asian and Pacific Islanders. Look, so they have, look, we already have seen what's going on around the country. We've seen how people have attacked Asian and Pacific Islanders just like they have always attacked African Americans. The reality is they are trying to pit minorities against one another. But what we have to do is not be in our feelings and be hurt, Jocelyn. We have to stand up and fight back against this Black attack, because that's exactly what it is. It's a Black attack. We have to stand up and fight back. Power concedes nothing without a demand. And so we can't sit idly by and say, oh, I was hurt by it. We have to show up. We have to call those members who are charged to represent us, because in their constitution, it says one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. But what you see is it's not indivisible. It is in fact very divisible. It's very divisive. And so we have to stand up and fight back and not fall into the trap of Asians versus African Americans. We have to say, look, equal justice for all. It says, I mean, we teach our children the Pledge of Allegiance, and we teach them to say, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So that's what we want. We want the and for all. But more importantly, I know a lot of people have talked about the dissent of Justice of Justice Jackson, which is a very strong and well-written dissent. But we also have to look at the words of Justice Sotomayor. And she said that there's nothing in the Constitution or Title VI that prohibits institutions from taking race into account. One, you want a diverse classroom because that adds to the discussion. We want all people in a classroom. That's where the all in, look, liberty and justice for all. Everybody has something to contribute. And so my rich African American culture is as important as a Asian and Pacific Islanders person's culture. We all have something to contribute to a discussion in a classroom. We want diversity in a classroom. We also want equity in a classroom. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, what this decision has done, really, I think it's going to impact the country. But if you ask me, as a very proud graduate of two historically Black colleges and universities, look, we know that, one, we never get equity when it comes to funding for our institutions. And we also make lemon out of lemonade. Look, we know that 80% of the students who matriculate at historically Black colleges and universities become professionals in our communities. And so Black people historically have always done what they've had to do. And this is no different. We will continue to do what we've always done. But the reality is we can use benign criteria other than race, although there is nothing in the Constitution that prohibits you from using race. But you can use benign criteria. You can say, what about the financial means of a student or their family? Or we can, use where a student went to high school, or, or how they grew up. Those are ways that we can still get students admitted. But the reality is we have a very conservative court, and that very conservative court is really based on partisanship, when that is the one body of our branch of government that is supposed to be benign to, of course, party. But we know that based upon the person who appoints you in this Roberts Court is how the person rules or how the person votes. Now that today, of course, ended the Supreme Court session for this particular term, but the reality is, look, people are not ruling based on the interpretation of the law. They're ruling based upon party. And that is as a result, let's face it, and I'm going to say it, as a result of people not voting. If we had voted for Hillary in 2016, guess what? Trump would not have been able to appoint two very conservative justices.
So if you're just joining us,
the Supreme Court that we currently have.
If you're just joining us while Dr. Kane unmutes himself, we're talking about the Supreme Court's ruling on affirmative action. If you have questions for our guests or comments, 888-669-1280 is the number. Again, 888, and our technology guru, He put it up on the screen, 888-669-1280. Go ahead, Dr. Kane. You look like you had a question for our guest.
Well, actually, I just wanted to make a statement that the court is broken, and I want to invite Ms. Williams to let us know, give us her summation of. I guess I'm using lawyer talk. I shouldn't say that. Give us give us her ideas behind what she thought about that decision as well.
I said it's probably not going to be the best answer on this particular one because I feel like it depends. When I first heard it, I was completely upset. I was like, oh my gosh, no way. This is not happening. This is crazy. Who would have done this? Why? This is insane. Go sit down. These are all the thoughts. But then after a while, I started to sit with it and I was like, and I hate that in some way, but also there's multiple reasons why. And for me, it's because it's deeper than that. It's not just, hey, we're not going to use race as a thought processing in admissions when it comes to the collegiate level, but it's, have we not failed in the school system from the beginning? K through 12 is poor in the United States. We consider ourselves a first world country and our education is third world, if not fourth world sometimes. Oftentimes when we get pitted against other countries for STEM, we rank, if I'm not mistaken, I looked at a survey, a statistic that I really wish I could have found earlier today, but I looked at it a couple years ago and we ranked out of like 40 countries, number 27 in
That's
STEM. We have technology, we have the means, allegedly, we have the money, we're sitting on all of these things, yet we can't afford to put more money and funding into education at the lower levels. I did look up the GDP and we spend 3.6% of the GDP on elementary and secondary education and 2.6% on post-secondary education. Now we spend double that on defense. But we don't spend any real money on putting education into our schools. I think it's hard time to try to say you want a merit-based society when you get to college level, but you're not teaching children how to even stand up to merit-based particularities when they're young. You can't just say, oh, I'm just going to start. That's like they say, well, you can't make a leopard change its spots. I do believe we can learn more the longer we are alive. I do believe we continue to learn, and hopefully we are continuing to learn no matter what age we are. However, those certain core skills that a child is learning, that a student is learning, that you are preparing for, how you study, what you're getting, your environment, the block where you can go from point A to point B, whether you get outside your block versus going to the other street, all comes from education at the K through 12 level. And now all of a sudden you want me to pop up and be great.
Well, and I think you hit a very valid point there. One of the things that had me in turmoil from, I guess, like what you said, my initial concerns was, I dare them do this, it's just a bunch of blah, 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 yada, 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 harsh conservative people, racist, whatever it may, you may want to call it. But, but then looking back, as you just said, I look back and I'm going like, but it wouldn't be necessary if we would have done the right thing from the beginning. If we would have been in elementary school, in high school, in middle school, and high school, have access, allow access, put the monies into those neighborhoods to allow access to the proper education, the right funding to get the proper education. If we're, I remember growing up, and I know this is many moons ago, but growing up when we had books that by the time we got them, they were 15 and 20 years old. And so I'm 15 and 20 years behind my white counterparts, okay? I mean, so many signatures on it that there was nothing, there was no place for you to sign those books out, because at the beginning of the year, back then you had to sign the books out. And there was no place to sign them out. So if you were already behind, somebody sent a cartoon the other day showing where you had these individuals getting ready to run a race, and the white guy had just a clear path ahead of him, and the black woman had some leg chains, ankle chains, whatever attached to them. There was a wall up there full of spurs and whatever else, and that they had to go through in order to be able to get to the same goal those white folks or rich folks in many occasions, because it ain't just black folks, and we can talk about that later. But those white folks, rich white folks in particular, that they got an easy path to. And we don't have from the beginning, we're behind on the beginning, but you want me to perform like I've been in one of those uh, uh, highly rated prep schools, you know, a lot of them private. And that's the other mistake we made. A lot of them private. I'm supposed to perform as well as those students coming in. It's just ridiculous to think that I can do that. And so affirmative action kind of helped, at least in my day, gave me that opportunity to at least kind of do somewhat of a catch up. Okay. I didn't catch up for all the years that I was not exposed to the educational process, the right educational process as it relates to entitlement that was given to others. But you know, we had to work hard. I think everybody knows we got to go 150%, 250% just to be able to either keep a job or to move forward in our professional career. They expect us to outperform our white counterparts.
Well, there was a couple of things that I was heard and I wanted to bring back because LJ, you had mentioned about athletes and athletes suffer. Now, having been a college student who went to school on a scholarship, and you also took the time to talk about the financial aspect of how that plays. I don't believe that there will be any major effect on athletics due to this sheer formative action because money always finds a way. So all the things that are going on, all the things that could be and it may be happening, money always finds a way. There is not an institution that has a successful athletic program that has not found a way to get those athletes to come to their school in conjunction with or around the policies that allow them to be admitted. So,
And
so,
so,
so that
and understand that you are speaking from your perspective. I don't know how old you are, but we do know that the Brown versus Board of Education was enacted in 1954. However, if you look at we can just say Negro League baseball. We know that prior to number 42, Jackie Robinson, look, most African American players played in the Negro leagues. And while they had talent, they still had white universities, and we also had historically black colleges and universities. And we also know that just maybe 50 years ago, you had sometimes three generations
right.
of black people living in one house, right?
Still do.
And I'm sorry.
You still do.
Right. And so what I'm saying to you is yes, you're going to see the hands on the clock reverse. Now you're starting to see it because you see housing prices are going up. And of course, the last hired are the first fired. So you'll see African American students who are graduating from college now, they're having to move back home because they cannot afford to purchase a home. And so the same thing with athletics and admissions for predominantly white institutions. Yes, it's not going to happen just next year, but you're starting to see fewer and fewer minorities matriculate at PWIs, and the numbers are dwindling. And so you are not going to see it this year. You're not going to see it maybe in the next 5 years because students who are admitted now are currently at those institutions. But in the next 10 years, you will start to see it because now with this Jim Crow 3.0, you have laws that say you cannot consider race. And like I know, despite their athletic prowess, we have seen the results from many studies that show that many of the entrance examinations are racially biased, and you're going to see more and more students going to historically Black colleges because they cannot get into the institutions just based on their race and their scores without affirmative action because of
but
the
when you
many of the issues we've discussed. One, we start with a shackle on our feet, and we also have more hills to climb.
But when we
So
look
you're
at the
not going to see it.
data over the last 25 years, there's been a steady decrease in Black enrollment in colleges already. And during that time, we had affirmative action. So the fact that that's been brought up by Dr. Kane and Ms. Williams is that the challenge is greater in the educational system before this time to go to secondary
The,
school or college and things of that
but
nature.
Tyrone, what I
Because
don't want
if
to is
you look at the
don't
historical data,
conflate. Don't conflate the two. I'm not. I don't believe in or. I'm saying and. So that I don't conflate the two.
okay,
I'm not right. We're talking about the instant case. The instant case that the Supreme Court ruled upon was on University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and Harvard in particular. So that was at the collegiate level. I never said that there were not disparities in elementary school or high school. That's why I mentioned at the onset Brown versus the Board of Education, because the whole point of Brown versus Board of Education was for us to have equal books and equal resources. But we
at
still
all of
50 plus years later, we still don't have it. So that is the argument for the elementary piece. But we know that. We know that, look, separate and unequal. I mean, separate and equal has been inherently unequal, and it has not been with all deliberate speed. We know that Thurgood Marshall, when he sat on the court, that was the thing. It was supposed to be with all deliberate speed. And here we are. Look, we're almost 60 years to the date. And look, it's 59 years to the date, and we still are inherently unequal.
right. Slow motion
Well,
in
I was
Ms. Williams, did you have
well,
something?
Dr. Kane, hold on a second, because I wanted to comment real quick on something LJ said. Because when I was preparing for the show, why did the 14th Amendment, why was it mentioned during this whole discussion about the affirmative action? And by the way, for those who don't know what the 14th Amendment is, it forbids states from denying any person life, liberty, or property without due process of law, or to deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws.
Ms. Williams.
So you just answered. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Williams.
No, you're fine. I was just gonna say, well, she said it in a way. Equal protection under the law is the portion in which they're trying to go under. And they're essentially saying that because of affirmative action, now we set aside, and I read a couple of articles throughout this time to prepare, and I'm going to get the number wrong because I read too many, but I'm going to guesstimate. They set aside a pocket of admissions in which they say, oh, this is going to be for the Black kids. And we're going to go to all of these schools, and we're going to find some of our feeder schools that we may or may not tap into throughout the year. We may or may not care about. We may or may not give a couple of bits of money to. We may or may not go throw a book at them every now and again. And we're going to go grab those, and we're going to see how good that level is. And then these 11 slots we got left, we're just going to toss the top ones in there real fast. And so essentially you were bypassing, and I'm doing air quotes because we all know they weren't bypassing. We were bypassing the system of equal merit, that we need to be on a merit-based society, that we need to be in a merit thought processing is by meritocracy. But we all know that that's not happening. For instance, law schools now are not even accepting, some law schools are not even doing.
Oh man, I missed that
And
part. Ms. Williams, repeat that again. Some law schools are not doing what?
they're not doing admissions tests anymore. The LSAT is no longer required for some law schools, Harvard being one of them. You can go to Harvard Law now, go into their sitting class. Once you get into their sitting class, if you make a particular grade point average throughout that time consistently and maintain a certain level of your classes, you can then automatically matriculate without a test into their upcoming legal And the thing is, why you would think, hey, that should benefit people who have merit-based things, it doesn't. It still benefits legacies. It still benefits,
Right.
exactly. It still has no real benefit. I fight for this all the time, saying that 5% of the legal population is Black and roughly 2% are female. 5%. Over 78 to 80% are white men, not even white people, white men make
Right.
up that much of the legal field. And as Ms. Holloway mentioned, 13% of the general population in the United States or more is African American. Yet you're telling me we can only find 5% of Black people smart enough to be lawyers?
You're even seeing even more dire statistics with physicians in the medical field. They have did a similar thing in what you just said as relates to not having to do the LSAT. They probably still doing the MCAT within this country, but a lot of foreign graduates, you used to have to at least, do a residency to prove what you know, what you can do, yada yada. They don't even require that anymore. That
Exactly.
just came through in the last couple of weeks to at least doing a residency kind of help you gauge the
Mm-hmm.
competency of those individuals who were trained outside of the United States. But again, that's where money plays a role in it because we have a shortage of doctors. And I'm not even going to talk about the shortage of Black physicians, male and female. But you have a shortage of doctors, and they're trying to fill that gap with anybody they can from a monetary standpoint.
And I mean, in California, you can just take the test. You don't even have to go through law school. You don't have to do any sort of quote unquote, as they just said, at UC Berkeley was one of the schools on this list for this affirmative action decision. As they said, but we're on a merit-based society, but you didn't have to show merit. You just went and sat and took the test.
Right,
So
right.
I feel like the 14th Amendment was definitely to say, hey, it's about equal protection, even though as Ms. Holloway has mentioned many times, we have not seen that. We have not experienced that. I can tell you a plethora, and I know she probably can, and anyone else in this panel, many incidents, even in law school, from quote unquote highly educated people with still limited and ugly beliefs
Right.
surrounding the intelligence of the Black population. I can remember, uh, I think my class was almost 70 some odd students, and 11 of us were Black.
What school
Right.
did you attend,
So
Ms. Williams?
say that again.
What school did you attend?
I attended Florida Coastal School of Law, and I will say that, right? Black. And so yes, and we had a very minor Black population, and we were still up against people who didn't think that we should be there. I often reminded them that if we weren't as smart as they were, we wouldn't be at the same school. However, the portions that I was getting at was that the merit isn't. If we were really just being able to go on a merit-based society, then we would have the equal opportunities on other platforms. So that's why I say I wore and I'm in the it depends stage. While I feel affirmative action had some merit to help, I also think nothing changed. So it kind of was a pandering placeholder in the first place.
Well, you're absolutely right. That's not,
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a lawyerly answer. It's absolutely a correct answer. Nothing changed. All of a sudden, you want to cite the 14th Amendment about something you really trying to get your billionaire buddies and their legacy to or whatever institution they graduated from, get some kind of approval from a governmental agency. All of a sudden, you want to cite the 14th Amendment. You're not citing that 14th Amendment when it comes down to uh, 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 the equal access to education within the elementary school, within the grade school. I mean, even when you look at, I'm a proud HBCU graduate, two institutions, okay, FAMU and Morehouse School of Medicine, and I've mentioned on this broadcast before. I'm out of the first graduating class out of Morehouse School of Medicine, but I'm also a graduate of the University of Florida in terms of its residency program. I know what I had to go through and what I experienced while I was there, as well as whatever else the rest of the things I experienced going through a medical education in a time period that's probably still present, where it was just so blatantly racist in terms of how they treated me, but even more importantly, how they treated my patients, and then want me to limit my mouth as to that's not the same treatment as you giving that person. You giving this a hysterectomy for an unwanted reason because you're a black female, but you didn't do it for this other person, and they're exactly the same except for the skin color. So I'm very, very upset with the decision because it has further reaching effect, which is the next question. It has a further reaching effect just in the academic world. Can anybody enlighten the rest of the audience what else it means in the rest of the world of employment, finances, whatever it may be, however you want
I'm
to look at
glad you asked that. That was going to be my next question as well.
Really quickly, I just want to throw this out here, and then I'll let Miss Holloway answer that since I talked so long the last time. But I want to say, I don't know if it was a coinky dink, but I just know that right after this decision came down, within the next 2 or 3 days, many diversity CEO hires that happened to be Black females were fired, tanked, done. And I'm thinking to myself, are we just not going to care anymore? Because this decision came down. And so I think that in and of itself proves the negative impact that this will have beyond the education system. I think it proves the negative impact that it will have, period. I wish there was an actual, I feel like, answer, even though I read many articles that I think have good ideas, such as what I mentioned before, getting deeper into feeder schools through the K and 12 years. I still don't know if that would be enough. Because at the end of the day, as you mentioned before, if you don't see my value even when I'm in your face, if you don't see my value even when I'm in your space, will you change your opinion? And the oftentimes part is no. We've just sat here and said that we have to work 4 times as hard, even though I still made straight A's in school. I still got a 4.0 grade point average. I double majored and minored in undergrad and came out with a 3.7, and still was considered having to work 4 times as hard. It reminds me of that Scandal scene where her dad is like telling her, you have to work 4 times as hard. I'm in the room with you. I have proven to you through my merit that I can make it. And you're still telling me, I had a professor tell me, I'm the double negative. I happen to be female and Black.
And Tyrone, you have to remember, I'm letting this Holloway answer also state on that. Tyrone, you have to remember, even from an athletic standpoint, you got to be super good compared to some of the non-Black people that can be represented in sports. Because you look at the quarterback of the league, I want to see what effect that's going to have on the NFL, because Black quarterbacks have always been good, have always been great, but they've always been put down. You look at Doug Williams, what he did. Just real quick, the year he won the Super Bowl, guess what Disney World stopped doing? They stopped doing that commercial that says, Doug Williams, you won the Super Bowl. What you gonna do next? I'm going to Disney World. That was the very last year Disney World sponsored that. And I can say that with merit because that is the very last year. Then you look at all these other quarterbacks that have come along. And so now the premier quarterback, the ones that are really good, be honest with you, they do what Black quarterbacks have always done. They scramble. They look for whatever they need to do in order to make things happen. While on the other side of the coin, our white quarterbacks are, and I just have to say it, and I'm not being racist, but it's the truth. So that's what we're doing. We pause for the truth. The white quarterbacks will sit back and 1, 2, 3, fire. He's supposed to be right there. 1, 2, 3, fire. He or she's supposed to be right there. So they have their plays designed by which they don't have to do much movement, doing anything else. Whereas these other guys scrambling for his life because they got to adapt to whatever the situation is.
Mm-hmm. So let me just pause for the truth. Let's just say, let's just call it what it is. The top 2 quarterbacks in the country, as evidenced by the last Super Bowl, are Black. Let's give a round of applause for Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes.
And
You
it
know,
could have been better songs
let's call
before.
it what it is. And I hate to say it, that was 1987, just 35 years ago, when Doug Williams went to the Super Bowl. But we know that there were Black quarterbacks who matriculated at HBCUs long before then. So you are absolutely right. I use sports because, one, people can relate to that, and because we know that the most gross income from a university typically comes from its sports program. That's why I mentioned that. But we know that it trickles down to not only in hiring, it happens in medicine, it happens, across the board. So, and in housing. It will affect all of that, because you know that, look, without affirmative action, albeit in the United States government, let me just say, the person who receives the most 8A government contracts are white women, because along with the Equal Protection Clause, which is what the 14th Amendment is called, Jocelyn, the Equal Protection Clause. Look, the reason why white women were considered in the 8A certification to get government contracts is because there were so many government contracts given to white males. However, what you saw was white males putting their companies in the names of their wives. And so minorities in particular still didn't benefit from government contracts to the degree that that the majority has. So understand also that with affirmative action hiring and affirmative action in academia, one, that just allowed us entry into the door. That oftentimes it allowed us entry. Does not mean that we were less intelligent or not meritorious. It just got us into the door. Moreover, hear me when I say to you that affirmative action, just like I said, it just opened the door. But the harsh reality is, when it comes to hiring, one, we're the last hired and the first fired. We already know that when it comes to equal pay, it takes a Black woman 8 months to make what a white male makes out the gate.
But don't
And
forget,
it takes a white woman 4 months. So it takes us 8 months just to make, when we talk about equal pay, right? But also, when you talk about, I'm a director of a bank, and right now we are in the throes of making sure that we're in compliance in housing. And so, like I know, because we make less, one, we typically have bad credit, or those of us who don't have bad credit, look, we typically have more fees because of the zip code that we either live in or that we can afford to buy in. So we will see ramifications in every aspect of our lives, because the income one makes typically determines the kind of house they can afford. And it also determines your quality of life, meaning the kind of institution of learning you can send your children. Or when you start talking about even the public school system, you know that a neighborhood determines the type of school, or shall I say partnerships, that go along with just with elementary schools. Now, unlike most of you, I don't think that going to a Black school is inferior, and I don't think that we suffer. I think, if anything, we can focus on education and not have to focus on race. I will tell you that my professors at Howard were far more difficult than my professors at University of Florida, because my professors at University of Florida had no expectation of me succeeding or being an intellect. However, my professors at Howard, they knew that I was an intellect, and they demanded more, and I didn't have to focus on my race. I could focus on learning and growing.
Don't forget, one of the things, I just want to clarify something real quick. White women are minorities.
They are.
So when they award those minority contracts, they can fulfill that obligation
of minorityship.
by hiring white women.
That's what they benefit more. They benefit more from affirmative action than us. That's the point I'm making. They benefit more.
Which is why I'm up on the floor of, did it really help us? So is it really going to hurt that it's not there?
That's because you can't. What I
That's the
said
point that
without,
I.
what I
That's the
said
point that I'm at.
eloquently without breaking it down. What I was saying was, you can't hard time Black people.
Absolutely. So the whole thing boils
But
down
I
for me.
agree with Miss Holloway. I'm sorry, but I agree with her that it at least gave the idea that you have to see me. At
Right.
least you had to.
Right.
Now you can willingly and not see me to it, which I think it gave in hindsight, as I'm thinking about it, it probably gave 5% of a hit up.
Right.
But I agree, those minorities that are still benefited from it are not even us. As a matter of fact, I hate to say it, and I'm about to say it. Oh, I can't believe it.
Say it.
The Asian community, who I love, by the way, but also the Asian community who brought forth this suit have higher numbers than we do on average. So it was like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me right now with this?
Really?
Because
But
while
the
you
whole
are a
point was to
minority,
have diversity in education. And so diversity means everyone should be at the table. So the equity is, equity is just that. Everyone should have an opportunity to be at the table. But yeah, it's not new. They didn't just start pitting.
Well,
I mean, look,
just
they
seems,
pit
it
light
seems like
skin
to
against
me.
dark skin, white people against Asians, Hispanics against African
Black,
Americans. So
whatever.
division is not new.
no,
It sounds to
it's
me
not.
like your arguments are arguing against a utopia, something that should be, could be, would be, that has never been. So when
Exactly.
you take away from me something that has never worked for me, I've not lost it.
Well,
And
I mean,
so it did help. It did help a small
yeah, I've been saying
percentage.
no.
To some
Affirmative action did allow a lot of us to get our foot in the door. It wasn't as good as what it should have been. I'm not going to fall back and say it did us no good. It
Open the door.
allowed a lot of us to get to. It allowed me to get where I'm at. To be quite frank with you, because I was
Agreed.
turned down. It's funny how I was turned down admission into the University of Florida, but after years of trying to prove myself, I later became the chief resident for University of Florida here in Jacksonville. I mean, but they turned me down for medical school admission. It's like
Now-
what?
Now I've only gone to PWI, so I know it's benefited me.
Right. Yeah,
I'm not even going to pretend. I have not had the pleasure of going to an HBCU. I always wanted to. I'm going to put this out here. HBCUs didn't want me. I applied.
You gotta get that.
I'm mad. I'm still a little salty if we can't tell. I have had the pleasure of affirmative action, and I say it in that regard because, and that's why I said I warred with this decision. While I recognize that it did help me because I would likely not have gotten admission into those PWIs, I also sit here with everyone on this panel to say, but did it help when still the minorities who were mostly affected by it were not ones who looked like me? Did it help that sometimes I still was sitting in a room and I was the only Black kid in the room? Legitimately the only Black child in the room. So the idea of Blackism fell on my shoulders. I had to quote what it was like constantly to be surrounded by those who did not look like me consistently. But did affirmative action get me into that door? Absolutely. I went to Jacksonville University, a private school here in Jacksonville. So I know that it got me through that door. But at the end of the day, there still are disparities. And I think that this is only going to further divide and further cause those disparities to show their head. I mean, they're already saying the Black community will completely go bankrupt by 2035.
Yeah, right.
And there's so many different things.
So it's two things. We haven't been bankrupt since slavery. Two things. PWI, privately white institutions, for those that didn't understand. I just need to make sure I clarify.
I thought it was predominantly
White
That's what I
institutions.
meant to say, predominantly.
Yes, I did throw that out
I
there.
don't know
With
why I
that
said private, but I meant to say predominantly white institutions. The other thing is Martin Luther King, even he said about affirmative action is a good thing. There's one deviation that some of these other people are not mentioning as what Martin Luther King felt. And that was that affirmative action should be implemented for Black folks and poor white folks. Because now economics plays a role. That was him whatever number of years ago, 50, whatever number of years in the 60s. He said exactly that. Okay, that's it should be for blacks and poor whites. Now, because as you guys, somebody mentioned earlier in the broadcast, when a capitalistic society wants to improve those individuals, who take capitalism to make zillions of dollars, the only way they can maintain their hierarchy is to place the peasants against one another. Okay, white versus black, poor versus rich, but especially poor versus other poor that don't look like it. That's how they really can keep this going. And then because green is a big answer. It ain't black, it ain't white, it's green for those individuals. This country would not have succeeded if it was not for that philosophy and ideology of turning each of one of us against the other. Because there was no such thing as black and white before 1619. There was no
Right. Slavery was economic. We were in fact property. We were chattel.
Right.
Slavery was
economic.
No
black and white.
And so that goes back to the whole point of the Equal Protection Clause. And when I say affirmative action, if you eliminate affirmative action, then of course you should also eliminate legacy admissions. I'll tell you, when I was on the admissions council at the University of Florida, look, that for every legacy admission, I pushed for someone who went to a HBCU, because that's exactly what it was. It was affirmative action. It was an action in the affirmative for someone who had a grandfather who matriculated at the institution. But more importantly, what we have to focus on, because to me, this argument, it's latent. It's late, as a matter of fact. It's latent in the fact that, one, you had a governor in this state who had already made this decision. And so to have this conversation tonight, we are late. What we should be focused on is, one, making sure that people get out the vote, but more importantly, making sure that at these institutions where our students are right now, that we support our students when they decide to stand up and fight back. So if you are afraid of losing your job, at least give some money for the bail. Okay, so if they get arrested, make sure you have bail money or you contribute to their bail. Because Miss Holloway, I say it, the babies know me, they can call on me. Contribute to their bail money, but more importantly, we have to fight. And I'm saying this for those people who might be watching, who are wondering, what are we going to do? We have to make sure, if they use the equal protection argument, all right, let's make it equal. Then we should make sure that we award scholarships or set aside seats for people who have certain financial hardships. That's not race, financial hardships. So that would be anybody with a financial hardship, white, black, Hispanic, whatever. Financial hardships are across the board, right? We can also say where a person went to high school, because we know that students who go to high school in zip code 32209 are not similarly situated as students who go to high school in 32256. More importantly, we can use personal experiences of hardship, like discrimination, racial, reparations. Say it, give me what you owe me.
Well, be better at giving the argument as it relates to equal protection than they are at giving that argument. Because if you're gonna do it for them, you need to do it for me.
Okay? Well, that's not going to happen.
I know.
We use the 14th Amendment because we know that we call it strict scrutiny in the law. It's a very hard structure to climb, because it has to be narrowly tailored for a compelling state interest. So to have something narrowly tailored for a compelling state interest, it's very difficult. And that's why they use the strict scrutiny. And that's why they use that argument, because it's very hard to overcome.
And
Was that
essentially, they already told us that they wasn't going to do equal with the 13th Amendment. I love that amendment. It's one of my faves. And I really wish people would read past the comma because there's a big old comma in there. And that comma is one of the most important parts
thing?
because the comma says, hey, yeah, and I'm finna do the abridged, my version of it. The comma says you are free until, unless, after, it's the comma is the most important part of the 13th Amendment. Essentially, they said we're gonna, make you free until we decide to put you in this here prison system, in which of course we make the greatest numbers of for no reason. And I'm so tired of hearing the black on black crime. I'm sorry, I know that's an aside, but I think it's the dumbest thing on the planet because it doesn't exist. White on white crime is the same, Asian on Asian crime is the same. We all live within the same communities, thereby we commit crimes to each other because that's who we see, that's who we know,
In
that's
that
what we
community.
talk.
That's the earliest
So
opportunity at committing a crime. Your neighbor.
it's, as a matter of fact, I actually looked up the numbers today as I was thinking about it, because that's the effect affirmative action has on literally everything. It made me even consider that fact. So I even looked up the numbers today to see, on average, how does white on white crime compare to black on black crime? Because I often hear that being a criminal defense attorney. And I think about 3,000 white deaths happened last year, and about 2,800 of them were committed by, guess who? White people. So technically, white on white crime is just as high as black on black crime. But my point is, we know that equal thing we're talking about in the 14th Amendment is null and void, because the 13th Amendment always told us it wasn't going to happen.
Well, we are at the end of the show, ladies. Lively discussion nonetheless, as I figured it would.
Too short.
Um,
And not the
but the good part about it is we've already known LJ, so she's been on the show before, so we know she'll be back. And as our new guest, Miss Williams, I hope you will return as our guest. At the end of every show, we like to give each of our guests the opportunity to share their final thoughts regarding this evening's discussion. I'll start with you, Miss Williams. What are your final thoughts regarding the topic of the Supreme Court's ruling, the impact of the Supreme Court's ruling on affirmative action?
It will impact everything. Be prepared. It will change how many things are done, from, I personally believe, even how you buy groceries and what grocery stores are in your neighborhood. It's definitely going to lower the numbers of what they show as affluent Black Americans, and it's definitely going to hit our pockets hard. And I think it's just something that we're just gonna have to do like we've always done: keep getting up, keep kicking, and keep going.
Thank you. Thank you so much. LJ, what are your final thoughts?
I concur wholeheartedly with what Ms. Williams said. It is going to impact our community in all facets. But more importantly, I think it's important. I mean, we have a democracy. I think it's more important for us to stand up and fight back. I hope that everyone who is within the sound of my voice will not only be active, but the way we stop these things from happening is to engage in the process, to make sure that you vote so that these super majorities that we have in 43 of the 50 states will not continue to impact states. But bigger than that, we have to make sure we vote at the federal level, because the reason why we see what we see in the Supreme Court is as a result of people who did not vote and as a result of partisanship.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Kane, what are your final thoughts regarding tonight's topic?
Let's go with Mr. Jackson first. If you forgot, he's online.
Tyrone?
All right, since I've been promoted. Okay. Well, here's what I have to say, and for our listeners and viewers as well. To lose something that you never had, to me, is a mute point. The question is simply this: will there be an effect? Yes, but the effect won't be what they hoped it to be, because our history, we have proven time and time again that we shall overcome. So whatever their desired purpose for this is, will fall short. So I heard LJ say that we're going to have an increase of students going to HBCUs, and then in the same sense, I also heard her say that the experience that she got from HBCUs was premium. So what is wrong with us urging now more to go to HBCU? So my mere conclusion is simply that is there going to be a major change? Yes, it's going to be far reaching, and none of us can predict exactly. But it's not going to have the desired effect. We too again shall overcome.
Thank you, Tyrone. Go ahead, Dr. Kane.
Well, I think Tyrone, when he speaks to as a group, I think he's absolutely correct. As a group of people, we will continue to do what we've done in the past, and that is overcome the adversities that's placed in front of us. But what we must not lose thought of is the individuals that are affected along the way. You know, the what's the word when it's in war? The collateral damage that has occurred to the individuals, and we need to limit as much collateral damage as possible. We also need to. I heard about going out and vote. I absolutely agree 100%. We need to go out and vote. Here's the only thing I want to clarify with getting out and vote. We need to make sure that if we get out and vote, we do it in the primary, because when it comes down to you waiting until someone else has already picked the candidate for you, it may not be a good candidate. Okay, it may be a candidate that sold you down the river time and time again. Could be name recognition that they went for, whatever the heck it might be. So if you don't get out and vote during the primary and listen, especially when you vote, you got to listen to what that person is bringing to the table, what ideas they're proposing. If they're going for re-election, what did you do in your first term, your second term, your third term? You got to get out there and say and reject name recognition, reject the fried chicken and watermelon. You got to get out there and reject that stuff if if there's nothing else that they can prove that they offer for being elected into that office. And if they get in that office and don't do what they need to do, it's time for them to be rejected. The last thing I just want to make sure, one of the listeners did say, just because they do increase admissions to an institution, they may not graduate from the institution. We've all seen where they admit people where they know would not be qualified enough to get into that institution. And so maybe we need a lot more institutions, a lot more money into the feeder schools, into those higher institutions, some of the more name prominent ones, but still feeder institutions like in community college, you know, because we got to play catch up from the racism that existed through, from K through 12th grade. And we got to put monies into those particular schools and institutions to bring us up to speed so that when we get through that 12th grade, we can compete with anybody else in that 12th grade. And then if you go to a junior college, which many of us are going to these days, if you go into a junior college, that junior college needs the funds by which to improve, be able to have a very viable and fruitful, productive program. And the way it works right now, for every $14,000 those higher institutions receive, junior colleges get $1. Okay, and most of most poor folk, they can't afford to send you off to Tallahassee or to Gainesville or to Miami or some of these other institutions. They're gonna put you in junior college first to try to get you ready to go on to a 4-year institution. Lot do not get there because they did not have, still funding was an issue. We need more vocational
And
schools.
where does that funding come from? Your state legislature. That funding comes from your state legislature.
That funding comes from me, my taxes that I pay.
But yeah, we
State
all pay
legislature
taxes,
must
but
allocate.
those tax dollars go to your municipality, and that money is dispersed from your legislator.
And that's exactly what I'm saying. It's being allocated by state legislatures. So it goes back to the voting again. I get your drift. It goes back to that voting. So when you start looking at all those different factors, and I know I went longer than what I usually do with my closure, but you know I can be winded because it's a passion. My age tells me I'm like Leon Spinks. What I got to lose? You know, at this point, ain't got no teeth, whatever. You know, but it needs to be that we take an aggressive approach to making sure that our kids and grandkids are treated fairly, provided their fair education, for which our tax dollars are used to promote other people's kids to get that education. So we need not just to idly stand by, vote, be proactive in the community, encourage others to vote. Don't just do your one vote. Get out there and perpetuate group voting. Get it out.
Take 5.
So thank you, Dr. Kane, Tyrone, and our guests, Ms. Williams and Ms. Holloway. My final thoughts regarding tonight's discussion is going to go a little different. After hearing all of you, I would like to really encourage and urge parents to get involved at their children's schools, starting at the time those children get to school, not just those athletic programs, but show up for PTA, get engaged, get involved, pay attention to your children's homework. If it's overwhelming for you, look for some tutorial programs to help your children, because we want to make sure that they're thriving and not put it solely in the hands of someone else. To our audience, thank you as always for tuning in to Pause for the Truth. Tune in next week as we enlighten you on another topic, a topic actually that Dr. Kane brought up that I never even heard the word. And if you would like to go ahead and do a heads up, nutraceuticals. So for those of you who are not familiar with that, that's what we're going to talk about next week, nutraceuticals. And stay cool, stay hydrated.
Stay woke.
Good night.
Stay woke. Okay.
Good night, everyone.
I was
I
never
appreciate it.